Hello, this is TCG and welcome to the 12th and final lecture for the CompTIA Security Plus 601 exam. Let's get started. Security configurations. Security configurations are crucial to ensure the integrity, availability, and confidentiality of systems and networks. Web server hardening. Displaying a banner message when someone attempts to connect to your web server provides basic information and discourages potential attackers. Principle of least privilege or POLP dictates that users and processes should only have the minimum permissions necessary to perform their intended tasks. Enable SSL or TSL to encrypt communication between the web server and clients. This protects sensitive data like login credentials and form submissions from eavesdropping and man in the middle attacks. Enable access logs to record details about requests made to your web server. This includes information like IP addresses, timestamps, and requested URLs. Regularly review access logs to identify suspicious activity, such as repeated login attempts or access from unauthorized locations. Error logs should also be enabled to record any errors encountered by the web server. Analyze error logs to identify potential security issues, such as SQL injection attempts or script errors that might indicate vulnerabilities. Validate and sanitize all user input submitted through forms, login credentials, or search queries. This prevents attackers from injecting malicious code, for example, SQL injection and cross-site scripting, that could exploit vulnerabilities in web applications. Operating system hardening. Software updates often include security patches that address newly discovered vulnerabilities. By regularly updating operating systems and applications, the risk of being exploited can be reduced significantly. Enforce strong and complex password with a minimum length, including a combination of uppercase and lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Avoid easily guessable passwords or dictionary words. Implement the principle of least privilege. Limit network access and block all unnecessary ports and services. By disabling unused network ports and services, the attack surface can be reduced significantly. Attackers cannot exploit vulnerabilities in systems that are not running. Use endpoint security softwares. Endpoint security softwares provide additional protection by monitoring system activity for suspicious behavior, detecting malware, and preventing unauthorized access attempts. Application server hardening. Disable or uninstall unnecessary components of web services that are not actively being used. Regularly apply patches and updates to the application server software. This can be automated by proprietary and third party tools. Enforce role based access control or RBAC to restrict access based on user roles. Finally, implement strong authentication mechanisms and multi factor authentication. Network infrastructure devices hardening. Many network devices come with pre-configured usernames and passwords for administrative access. These defaults are widely known and are the first targets for attackers. Therefore, it is recommended to change the default usernames and passwords for all network devices to strong and unique credentials. Network devices manufacturers regularly release firmware updates that address security vulnerabilities. Keeping your devices updated ensures that they are patched against known exploits. MFA or multi-factor authentication adds an extra layer of security to the login process beyond just a username and password. It typically requires a secondary verification factor, such as code from an authenticator app or a security token. Change default settings, passwords, and ports. Network devices often come with pre-configured settings like default community settings, strings, or SNMP, or unused services enabled. These defaults are well documented and can be exploited, which is why it is recommended to disable unused services and protocols. Personnel security. Personnel security involves implementing policies and procedures to ensure that employees and contractors comply with security protocols to protect the organization's assets. Acceptance Use Policy or AUP. An AUP is a set of rules and guidelines that define acceptable and unacceptable use of organizational resources, including computer systems, networks, and data. It defines who the policy applies to, be it employees, contractors, or etc. And it also details the acceptable use of organizational resources. User activity may be monitored, and there may be consequences of the violation of the policies. Business policies. Job rotation. Job rotation involves periodically moving employees between different jobs or roles within the organization. This reduces the risk of fraud by preventing employees from having too much control over a single process. Mandatory vacations. Mandatory vacations requires employees to take vacations during which their duties are performed by others. This helps us detect fraudulent activities that may be uncovered during the employee's absence. Separation of duties. Separation of duties ensures that critical tasks are divided among multiple employees to prevent fraud and errors. This reduces the risk of internal fraud. Clean desk policy. The clean desk policy requires employees to clear their desks of all sensitive information when they are not on their desk. It reduces the risk of unauthorized access. Personnel security procedures. Onboarding. Onboarding is a process of integrating new employees into the organization and ensuring that they understand and comply with the security policies. The new employees have their backgrounds checked and they undergo training, and the policies of the organization are explained to them. Offboarding. Offboarding is the process of securely terminating an employee's access to organizational resources when they leave the company. Their access credentials and permissions are revoked, and the organization or the company collects the company issued devices and assets. User training. Training users on cybersecurity best practices is crucial for any organization's security posture. Empowering users with knowledge empowers them to identify and avoid security threats, significantly reducing the risk of successful cyber attacks. Gamification. Gamification leverages game mechanics such as points, leaderboards, and rewards to make learning more interactive and engaging. Security training can be transformed into a game where users learn by completing challenges and scenarios. Capture the Flag or CTFs are cybersecurity competitions where participants test their skills by solving security challenges that involve finding vulnerabilities in simulated systems, hacking puzzles, and cryptography. CTFs provide a fun and challenging way for users to learn about real world security vulnerabilities and how attackers exploit them. Phishing simulations mimic real world phishing attempts by sending simulated phishing emails to users. Users who click on malicious links or attachments are directed to training content that explains why the email was a phishing attempt. Computer based learning or CBT. CBT is a traditional e learning approach that delivers security awareness training modules online. These modules can cover a wide range of security topics through interactive elements, videos, and quizzes. CBT provides a flexible and cost effective way to deliver security training to a large number of users at once. Role based security awareness training. Traditional security awareness training often takes a one size fits all approach. However, role based security awareness training personalizes the training experience by tailoring it to the specific roles and responsibilities of the employees. Users receive training directly relevant to their daily tasks and the types of threats they are more likely to encounter. This makes the training more engaging and improves knowledge retention. Third party risk management. Vendors. Provide products or services to an organization. Managing the risks associated with vendors is critical to maintaining the security and integrity of the organization's operations. In order to do that, we evaluate the security posture, compliance, and risk management practices of the potential vendors before engagement. We regularly monitor and review the performance and security practices of the vendors and establish clear security requirements and expectations in contracts. Supply chain. The supply chain involves all parties involved in the production, handling, and distribution of a product or service. Managing supply chain risks is essential to ensure the integrity and security of products and services. In order to prevent these risks, we need to identify and assess risks at each stage of the supply chain. There needs to be mandatory security standards for all suppliers and subcontractors, and regular audits and assessments of supply chain partners need to be conducted. Business partners. Business partners can include joint ventures, alliances, and other strategic partnerships. Ensuring that partners maintain adequate security practices is crucial to protecting shared information and resources. Business partners are often closer than vendors, which is why we conduct thorough due diligence before forming partnerships. In case of an incident, we need to coordinate incident response efforts with business partners. Common agreements. Service Level Agreement or SLA. SLA is a contract between a service provider and a customer that specifies expected level of service. It includes metrics for performance, uptime, availability, and response times. Memorandum of Understanding or MOU. An MOU is a non binding agreement that outlines the terms and details of a mutual understanding or agreement between two or more parties. Master Service Agreement or MSA. MSA has the terms and conditions under which all future agreements or transactions will be conducted. BPA or Business Partner Agreement. The BPA outlines the rights and responsibilities of business partners. Non Disclosure Agreement or NDA. An NDA is a legal contract that outlines confidential material, knowledge, or information that parties wish to share with one another for certain purposes but wish to restrict access to or by third parties. Product Support Lifetime. End of Life or EOL. EOL specifies when the product is no longer sold but is still supported by the manufacturer. End of Service Life or EOSL is the point at which manufacturer stops providing any service, support, or updates for the product. Mapping data. Mapping data is effectively crucial for organizations to ensure data integrity, confidentiality, and availability. Data governance. Data governance involves the overall management of data availability, usability, integrity, and security in an organization. It includes a set of processes and policies that ensure data is managed consistently and used effectively. Data governance policies. These policies establish guidelines for data management, including data ownership, data quality standards, and data lifecycle management. Data classification. Data classification involves categorizing data based on its sensitivity and criticality to the organization. This helps in applying appropriate security measures and ensuring compliance with regulations. The classification levels can be based on sensitivity and criticality, such as public, internal, confidential, and restricted data. Data classification also allows us to ensure compliance with relevant data privacy regulations, such as GDPR. Credential policies, credential management, enforce password complexity rules that mandate a minimum password length and a combination of uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Enforce policies that require regular password changes and avoid reuse of old passwords or use passwords that are similar to previous ones. Implementing multi factor authentication significantly enhances security by adding an extra layer of verification beyond just a username and password. It typically requires a secondary factor, such as a code from an authenticator app, a security token, or biometrics. Regularly update and rotate credentials for critical systems and privileged accounts periodically, even without a suspected breach. This reduces the risk of damage if a credential is compromised. Find a balance between security and usability when determining rotation frequency. Too frequent rotation can be burdensome for users, while infrequent rotation can leave systems vulnerable for long periods. Passwords and other credentials should never be stored in plain text. Utilize strong encryption methods to protect them at rest on servers. When storing passwords, consider one-way hashing with a sort. Hashing transforms passwords into a scrambled format, and adding a random salt value prevents attackers from using rainbow tables to reverse the hash and crack the password. Personnel accounts. Personal accounts are unique user accounts assigned to each employee. This ensures individual accountability and simplifies activity tracking. A standardized account creation process is developed. for creating users' account. This should include user provisioning with appropriate permissions based on the job role, password policy enforcement, and initial access training on security policies and procedures. In order to secure your credentials, enforce strong password creation rules, including password complexity requirements, and avoid reuse. Consider password managers for secure storage and generation. Regularly monitor user account activity to detect suspicious behavior. This might include unusual login attempts, accessing unauthorized files or systems, or downloading large amounts of data. Establish protocols for investigating suspicious activity and taking appropriate actions, such as account suspension or password resets. Third party accounts. Third party accounts are accounts that are required by vendors, partners, and contractors to access the organization's resources. Limit the access of third party accounts to only the specific systems and data necessary for them to fulfill the contracted tasks. This minimizes the potential damage if an account is compromised. Before granting access, assess the security posture of the third party. This might involve reviewing the security policies, data handling practices, and incident response plans. Include security clauses in your agreements with the third parties. These clauses should outline expectations for data security, breach notification, and access termination procedures. Establish clear guidelines for third party access through an AUP. This policy should outline permitted activities, data security obligations, and consequences for policy violations. Device accounts. Device accounts are used to access and manage network devices, servers, and other hardware. Utilize secure protocols for remote management of devices. These protocols encrypt communication between the management console and the device, protecting sensitive information like usernames and passwords from eavesdropping. Use protocols like Secure Shell for remote access to network devices and servers. For web-based management interfaces, ensure that they use HTTPS with strong encryption. Assign strong and unique credentials to each device account. Avoid using shared accounts or generic passwords across multiple devices. This prevents unauthorized access if one credential is compromised. Enable logging on the device to record all activity related to device accounts. These logs should capture details like login attempts, successful logins, configuration details, and file access activities. Geofencing is a location-based security technique. It allows you to define a virtual geographic boundary. Access attempts originating from outside this boundary can be flagged as suspicious. Server accounts. Server accounts are used by software and services running on servers to access resources and perform tasks. Apply the principle of least privilege or POLP when managing server access. Grant server accounts only to the minimum permission. Apply the principle of least privilege when managing server accounts. Grant server accounts only the minimum permissions necessary to perform their intended function. This minimizes the potential damage if a server account is compromised. For example, a web server account might only need permission to access specific web directories and system resources required to run the web service. It shouldn't have full administrative access to the entire server. Regularly identify and disable server accounts that are no longer in use. Dormant accounts present a potential security risk if their credentials are compromised. Conduct regular audits of server account activity to ensure they comply with your organization's security policies. This might involve verifying that accounts have appropriate permissions, identifying unauthorized access attempts, and detecting suspicious activity patterns. Rotate server account credentials periodically to mitigate the risk of compromise. Administrator or root accounts. These accounts hold the highest level of access within a system. They are powerful but require extreme care to protect. These accounts should not be used for everyday tasks such as checking emails or browsing the web. This minimizes the risk of accidentally introducing malware or compromising the system through these accounts. Limit the number of administrator or root accounts to the absolute minimum required. This reduces the number of potential targets for the attackers. Enforce multi-factor authentication for administrator and root accounts. This adds an extra layer of security beyond just a username and password. It typically requires a secondary factor like a code from an authenticator app, a security token, or biometrics. In rare cases, there might be specific technical limitations that prevent using MFA for certain administrator or root accounts. If exceptions are absolutely necessary, implement the strictest policy access controls to compensate for the lack of MFA. Continuously monitor and log all activities performed using the administrator and root accounts. These logs should include capture details like who accessed the account, when the access occurred, and what actions were performed. Rotate administrator and root account credentials regularly to minimize the risk of compromise. Even a slight delay in changing compromised credentials can have significant consequences. Organizational policies. Organizational policies are crucial for maintaining the security, efficiency, and compliance of business operations. Change management. Change management is the systematic approach to dealing with changes in an organization's process, systems, or policies. Its goal is to ensure that changes are implemented smoothly and successfully with minimum disruption to services. Identify the need for change and its potential impact by clearly defining the problem or opportunity that necessitates change. This is because any small mistake while implementing change can cause harm to the organization. Change control. Change control is a vital part of change management. It ensures that any modification to an organization's process, systems, or policies are introduced in a controlled and well managed manner. List. The proposed change is carefully evaluated to understand its potential impact. This might involve assessing the technical feasibility, identifying potential risks and mitigation strategies, estimating costs and benefits, and considering the impact on users and stakeholders. Depending on the significance of the change, relevant stakeholders or a change control board or CBC provides approvals. This Depending on the significance of the change, relevant stakeholders or a change control board or a CCB provides approvals. The CCB is a cross functional group responsible for reviewing and approving change requests. A key goal of change control is to ensure minimal disruption to ongoing operations during implementation. This involves carefully planning, scheduling maintenance windows, and developing rollback strategies in case of unforeseen incidents. Whenever possible, test the change in a controlled environment before deploying it to production. This helps identify and address potential problems before they impact live systems. Also, develop a rollback plan outlining the steps to revert to the previous state if the changes caused unexpected issues. The entire change control process should be well documented. This includes the change request document, the impact assessment report, approved records, implementation plan and rollback procedures, and test results and any identified issues. After implementing the change, actively monitor for any issues or unexpected outcomes. Address them promptly to minimize negative impacts. Asset management. Asset management is the systematic tracking and management of an organization's assets. This includes tangible assets, intangible assets, and financial assets. Asset inventory. Asset inventory is an up to date comprehensive inventory of all assets. This should include asset types, model and serial number, location, acquisition date and cost, assigned user or department, and warranty and maintenance information. Track the life cycle of your assets from acquisition through deployment, usage, maintenance, and eventual disposal. This helps you make informed decisions about the asset lifecycle stages. Integrating asset management with an SIEM system provides valuable insight. SIEM can collect data from various security tools and correlate it with asset information. This allows organizations to identify potential security threats associated with specific assets and respond faster to security incidents. Organizations need to ensure that their assets comply with relevant regulations and industry standards. Asset management helps them track regulatory requirements and maintain compliance. Tracking software licenses ensures proper usage and avoidance of compliance issues. This includes monitoring license expiration dates and managing license renewals. Risk management. Risk management involves identifying, assessing, and prioritizing risks, followed by coordinated efforts to minimize, monitor, and control the probability or impact of unfortunate events. Various types of risk management include assessing external and internal threats, managing legacy systems, protecting intellectual property, handling multi-party risks, and ensuring software licenses and compliance. Risk assessment. Risk assessment is the process of identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks to an organization's asset and operations. It helps in determining the potential impact of various threats and vulnerabilities. It prioritizes risks based on the potential impact and likelihood of happening and determines the acceptance level of risk for the organization. Finally, a risk assessment report is created to inform stakeholders. It documents the findings and recommendations for risk mitigation. External threats. External threats originate from outside the organization and can significantly disrupt operations, damaging the reputation and lead to financial losses. Natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and fires cause physical damage to facilities and IT infrastructure. These events can also lead to data loss, impacting business continuity. In order to combat the loss of data and continuity, organizations may develop a comprehensive disaster recovery plan that outlines the procedures for responding to and recovering from disasters, backing up and restoring critical data, and maintaining business continuity during outages. Internal threats. Internal threats originate from within the organization and can be just as damaging as external threats. These threats can be intentional by malicious insiders or unintentional by negligent employees or contractors. In order to identify these internal threats, conduct thorough background checks on potential employees and contractors before granting them access to the organization's systems and data. Implement regular security awareness training programs to educate employees on identifying and reporting suspicious activities, recognizing social engineering attempts, and following best practices for password hygiene and handling data. Implement the principle of least privilege, granting users only the minimum access permissions necessary for the job functions. This minimizes the potential damage if an account is compromised. Regularly review the account privileges to ensure that they remain aligned with current job roles and responsibilities. Remove unnecessary access rights promptly. Monitor user activity and system logs to identify potential suspected behavior that might indicate insider threats. This might include unusual access times or locations, downloading large amounts of data, or attempting to access unauthorized files or systems. Maintain robust backup systems for the organization's critical data. This allows the organization to recover data in case of an accidental deletion, corruption, or malicious attack by insiders. It is also required to regularly test the backup and recovery procedures to ensure that they function as intended during an incident. Legacy systems. Legacy systems, which may be outdated technology or software, present a unique challenge for organizations. While they may still perform core business functions, they often lack modern security features and pose a significant security risk. Legacy systems may be slow, unreliable, and incompatible with newer technologies, hindering business agility. If an organization wants to switch over from legacy systems to a more modern technology, completely replacing all legacy systems at once might be impractical. The organization may consider a phased approach, prioritizing the most critical systems for the modernization and gradually replacing others over time. While phasing out legacy systems, it is recommended to implement additional security measures to mitigate risks, such as isolate legacy systems from a main network to minimize the potential damage if they are compromised, increase monitoring of legacy systems to detect suspicious activity more readily, and limit access to legacy systems only to authorized personnel who require it for their work. Intellectual property theft. IP theft involves the unauthorized use, replication, or distribution of an organization's intellectual assets, including patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. Theft of intellectual property can lead to significant financial losses, including lost revenue and legacy costs. It may also allow competitors to gain access to proprietary information, that can erode an organization's market advantage. In order to mitigate the risks from intellectual property theft, it is required to implement strict access control and encryption to protect sensitive information. Regularly monitor and audit IP use and distribution, and use legal protections such as patents, copyrights, and trademarks to secure intellectual property. Multi-party risks. Multi-party risk arises from the complex web of interactions and dependencies between different entities in today's interconnected business landscape. For example, disruptions within the supply chain can impact the organization's production schedules, leading to production shortages and delayed deliveries. A security breach at a third party vendor can compromise the sensitive information and the systems of the organizations. Attackers may exploit vulnerabilities in the vendor's network to gain access to the organization's data. In order to mitigate these risks, establish clear contractual agreements with third party partners that explicitly outline the security requirements, incident response obligations, and audit rights. Software compliance and licensing. Software compliance and licensing involves ensuring the organization uses software legally and adheres to the terms set forth in the license agreements. This is crucial to avoid legal issues, financial penalties, and potential security risks. In order to manage software licenses, implement a system to track and manage all the software licenses. This includes recording details like software name and version, license type, number of authorized users or devices, and license expiration date. Monitor software usage to ensure that it complies with the licenses. This might involve using software license management tools to track installations and user activity. Conduct regular reviews of your software licenses to identify any potential issues, such as licenses nearing expiration or changes in software usage patterns that might require additional licenses. Risk management. Risk management is a crucial process for any organization. It involves identifying, assessing, and treating potential threats to the organization's asset, resources, and overall success. Risk acceptance. It refers to acknowledging the risks and making a conscious decision to accept it without taking further action. This is often appropriate for risks with minimum potential impact or a very likelihood of occurring. Risk avoidance. This is the most straightforward approach, completely eliminating the risk by discontinuing the activity that creates the risk or choosing a safer alternative. Risk reduction. This strategy involves implementing measures to reduce the likelihood of the risk occurring or to minimize its potential impact if it does. This is often the most practical approach for many risks. Transferring the risk. This involves shifting the financial or operational burden of the risk to a third party, often through insurance or outsourcing. Risk analysis. Risk analysis is a critical part of risk management, involving the evaluation of potential risks to an organization's operation and assets. Evaluating risks. In order to evaluate risks, we use risk registers and risk heat maps. A risk register is a tool to document and track risks within an organization. It typically includes details such as the risk description, impact, likelihood, mitigation strategies, risk owner, and current status. A risk heat map is a visual representation of the risks, typically used using a matrix to plot the likelihood of risks against their impact. It helps prioritize risks by categorizing them into different levels of security, such as low, medium, and high. Audit risk model. The audit risk model is a conceptual framework used by auditors to assess and manage the risk of issuing an inaccurate audit opinion. It helps them determine the nature and extent of the audit procedures needed to provide a reasonable level of assurance that the financial statements are free from material misassessment. There are three core components of the audit risk model. Inherited risk refers to the susceptibility of an assertion to material mismanagement before considering any related controls. Some factors that contribute to the inherited risks include the complexity of transaction or account processing, judgment required in making account estimates, the susceptibility of assets to misappropriation, and the existence of any related party transactions. Residual risk is the remaining risk of a material misassessment after considering the inherited risk. It represents the risk that remains even after the audit procedures have been performed. The audit firm and the client will have a predefined risk appetite. This represents the acceptance level of residual risk they are willing to tolerate. Risk control assessment. A risk control assessment, or an RCA, is a systematic process for evaluating the effectiveness of existing controls in mitigating identifiable threats. It plays a critical role in ensuring the organization's risk management strategy is robust and efficient. An RCA also highlights areas where controls are insufficient or absent and suggests enhancement to existing controls or the implementation of new controls. Risk awareness. Risk awareness involves fostering an understanding of risks and their impacts amongst employees and stakeholders. It is essential for creating a risk conscious culture within the organization. Key practices include providing regular training sessions on risk management and specific risks related to organization, sharing information about risks, incidents, and best practices through internal channels such as newsletters or intranets, and encouraging employees to report risks and participate in risk management events. Regulations related to security posture. Various regulations impact an organization's risk posture by setting requirements for risk management and compliance. Compliance with these regulations is crucial for avoiding legal penalties and maintaining a positive reputation. Some examples of these regulations are GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation. This regulation, enforced in the EU, imposes strict requirements of how organizations collect, store, and use personal data. PCI DSS, or Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. This industry driven standard sets security requirements for organizations that handle payment card information. Qualitative risk assessment. Qualitative risk assessment involves evaluating risks based on subjective criteria, such as expert judgment and experience. It focuses on identifying and prioritizing risks without using numerical values. It is done by conducting interviews and workshops with stakeholders to gather insights on potential risks. Rating scales are used to assess the likelihood and impact of risks, and scenarios are developed to understand the potential consequences of different risks. Quantitative risk assessment. Quantitative risk assessment uses numerical data and statistics methods to evaluate risks. It involves calculating metrics such as likelihood, SLE, and ALE. SLE is the single loss expectancy, which is the expected monetary loss from a single occurrence of risk. It is calculated as SLE equals asset value times exposure factor. Annual loss expectancy is the expected annual monetary loss from a risk. It is calculated as SLE multiplied by annual rate of occurrence. It is also required to assess the impacts of risk on non-financial aspects such as reputation, customer trust, and operation efficiency. Disasters. Disasters can be categorized into different types based on their origin and nature. Environment disasters. These are natural events such as earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and wildfires that can cause significant damage and disruption. Person-made disaster. These are events caused by human actions such as terrorism, industrial accidents, and cyber attacks. Internal disaster. These are disasters that originate from within the organizations, such as system files, insider threats, and and data breaches. External threats. These are disasters originating outside the organization, such as economic downturns, geopolitical events, and supply chain disruptions. Business Impact Analysis, or BIA. BIA is a process used to determine the potential effects of an interruption to critical business operations due to a disaster, accident, or emergency. It helps identify critical functions, assess the impact of disruptions, and develop recovery strategies. Recovery time objective, or RTO, is the maximum acceptable time of that a business process or IT system can be down after a failure or disaster before the operation must be restored to avoid unacceptable consequences. Recovery point objective, or RPO, is the maximum acceptable amount of data loss measured in time. It defines the point in time to which data must be restored to resume business operations after a disaster. Mean time to recovery, or MTTR. This is the average time required to repair a system or component and restore it to operational status after a failure. MTBF or mean time between failures. This is the average time between the failures of a system or component. It helps predict reliability and plan maintenance schedules. Functional Recovery Plan. A functional recovery plan is a vital component of any organization's disaster recovery strategy. It outlines the steps and procedures to restore critical business functions after a disruption, ensuring a swift and efficient recovery. The first step involves conducting a continuity analysis to identify the essential business functions that are critical for the organization's survival and continued operation. Once identified, prioritize essential functions based on the criticality and the impact of downtime of each function. For each prioritized function, create detailed recovery procedures that outline the specific steps required to restore it. Assign clear ownership and responsibility for executing each recovery procedure to specific individuals or teams. Ensure that everyone understands their roles and responsibilities in the event of a disaster. Regularly test the functional recovery plan through simulations and walkthroughs to identify any gaps or weaknesses. Removing single point of failures. SPOFs or single point of failures are components or systems that, if they fail, will cause the entire system or operation to fail. Eliminating SPOFs increases system reliability and availability. To remove SPOFs, implement redundant systems and components to provide backup in case of failure. Use multiple suppliers or service providers to reduce dependency on a single source, and conduct regular maintenance and updates to identify and address potential single point of failures. Redundancy. Redundancy involves duplicating critical components or systems to ensure that there is a backup available in case of failure. It enhances reliability and availability. There are three approaches to redundancy. The first approach is the hardware approach, which involves having multiple physical devices, such as servers and storage arrays, to ensure availability even if one faults. Common configurations include mirroring, in which data is simultaneously written to two or more storage devices for real time redundancy, or failover clusters, in which multiple servers are clustered together, and if one server fails, another automatically takes over its workload. The second approach is the software redundancy, which involves multiple instances of critical software applications or services on different servers. If one instance fails, the other can continue functioning, minimizing downtime. The third approach is the network approach, in which redundancy can be applied to network connectivity as well. This involves using multiple network connection or data paths to ensure connectivity in case of a failure in one path. Disaster Recovery Plan or DRP. A DRP is a critical document that outlines the steps an organization will take to recover and protect its IT infrastructure in the event of a disaster. It's a comprehensive roadmap that ensures business continuity by minimizing downtime and data loss during disruptions. The first step of a DRP involves conducting a thorough risk assessment to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities that could impact the IT system and data. Based on the identified risks, develop strategies for recovering critical IT systems and data. This includes data backups, business impact analysis, or alternate sites. The DRP should outline clear procedures for responding to an emergency, including activation procedures, communication plan, and incident response. Lastly, the effectiveness of the DRP relies on its practicality. Regularly test the plan through simulations and walkthroughs to identify any gaps or weaknesses. Impact assessment. An impact assessment helps any organization understand the potential consequences of a disruptive event, allowing the organization to prioritize mitigation strategies and develop effective response plans. The impacted areas an organization should check during a disruptive event or after it are life, which is assessing the impact of human life and safety, including employees and customers; property, evaluating potential damage to physical assets such as building, equipment, and inventory; finance, determining the financial impact, including lost revenue, increased costs, and penalties; safety, assessing the impact on workplace safety and compliance with safety regulations; and reputation, evaluating the potential damage to the organization's reputation and customer trust. Mission essential functions. Mission essential functions are the critical activities necessary for the survival and continued operation of the organization. Identifying these functions help prioritize recovery effects. The first step is to determine which business activities are essential to achieve the organization's mission and objectives, and then identifying the dependencies between functions and systems to understand the impact of the disruptions on mission essential functions. Site risk assessment. Site risk assessment involves evaluating the risks associated with physical locations where the organization operates. It involves assessing the reliability and availability of the infrastructure against unauthorized access, theft, and vandalism, and evaluating the risk of natural disasters such as earthquakes and floods and their impact on this site. Privacy and data breaches. Privacy and data breaches are significant concerns for organizations as they can lead to severe consequences. Information lifecycle. The information lifecycle refers to the stages that data goes through from creation to destruction. Proper management of data at each stage is essential to ensure privacy and security. The steps are as follows. Creation. Data is generated or received by an organization through various means such as forms, transactions, or communication. Storage. Data is stored in databases, file systems, or cloud storage. Secure storage practices must be implemented to protect data from unauthorized access. Usage. Data is accessed and used for business operations, analysis, or decision making. Access controls and usage policies are essential to ensure data is used appropriately. Sharing. Data is shared internally or externally with partners, customers, or regulatory bodies. Data sharing must comply with privacy concerns and regulations. Archival. Data that is no longer actively used is archived for long-term storage. Archival practices should ensure data remains secure and retrievable if needed. Destruction. Data is securely destroyed when it is no longer required. Proper data destruction methods must be followed to prevent data recovery and misuse. Consequences of data breaches. Data breaches can have severe consequences for organizations and individuals. Understanding these consequences helps in developing effective prevention and response strategies. A data breach can significantly harm an organization's reputation, leading to a loss of customer trust and loyalty. Personal information exposed in a data breach can be used for identity theft, leading to financial losses and legal issues for affected individuals. Regulatory bodies may impose substantial fines on organizations that fail to protect data adequately and comply with privacy laws. Breaches can result in the theft of intellectual property, including trade secrets, patents, or proprietary information. Notification. Notification of data breaches is a critical component of incident response. Timely and transparent communication helps mitigate the impact of a breach. Many privacy laws require organizations to notify affected individuals and regulatory bodies of data breaches within a specified time frame. Notifications should include details about the breach, the type of data compromised, potential impacts, and the steps taken to mitigate the breach. Use appropriate communication channels such as emails, letters, or public announcements to reach affected individuals and stakeholders. PIA or Privacy Impact Assessment. A PIA is a process used to identify and assess privacy risks associated with new projects, systems, or changes to existing processes. The steps for PIA are as follows. The first step is to determine what personal data will be collected, processed, or stored. The second step is to evaluate the potential privacy risks and the impact of individuals' privacy rights. The third step is to develop the strategies to mitigate identified risks, such as implemented security controls or data minimization techniques. And the last step is to record the findings and decisions made during the PIA process. Privacy notices. Privacy notices are essential for informing individuals about how their data is stored, used, and protected. Privacy notices should include information on data protection practices, purposes of data processing, data sharing, and individuals' rights. The organization should ensure privacy notices are clear, concise, and easily accessible to individuals. And privacy notices must comply with the relevant privacy laws and regulations. Data classifications. Data classification is the process of organizing data into categories based on its sensitivity and the level of protection it requires. Properly labeling sensitive data helps ensure that it is handled appropriately and safeguarded against unauthorized access. Labeling sensitive data. Labeling sensitive data involves tagging data with labels that indicate its classification. This helps in implementing appropriate security controls and access permissions. It helps comply with legal and regulatory requirements by identifying and protecting sensitive information, and facilitates data management and access control by categorizing data based on sensitivity. In the labeling process, we create labels for different categories of data and apply labels to data based on this classification, either manually or using automated tools. Data classification categories. Data can be classified into several categories based on its sensitivity and the level of protection it needs. Personally Identified Information or PII. PII is information that can identify an individual, such as name, address, social security number, etc. It must be protected to prevent identity theft and comply with privacy laws. Proprietary data is information that is owned by the organization and is critical to its operations. It requires strong security measures to prevent competitive disadvantage or financial loss. PHI or Protected Health Information is health related information that can identify an individual. It is also strict regulations to protect patient privacy and confidentiality. Public or unclassified data is information that is intended for public access and does not require special protection. Minimal protection is needed, but integrity must be maintained. Sensitive data is information that requires a high level of protection due to the potential impact if disclosed. Confidential data is information that is highly sensitive and critical to the organization and requires the highest level of protection, including encryption, strict access control, and monitoring. Critical data is information that is vital to the organization's operation and whose loss would have a severe impact. Financial information is data related to the financial activities of the organization, which also requires strong protection measures to prevent fraud and comply with financial regulations. Government data is information created, stored, or managed by the government entities, and it must also adhere to specific regulations and classification levels. Customer data is the information related to the customers of the organization, and it also requires protection to maintain customer trust and comply with data protection laws. Implementing data classification. The first step to implementing data classification is to establish a data classification policy that outlines classification categories, criteria, and labeling procedures. Next, the data is to be reviewed and categorized according to the classification policy. Lastly, appropriate labels are applied to the data to indicate its classification. After the classification is complete, we need to apply security measures based on the data classification, educate employees on data classification and handling procedures, and regularly review and update data classification and policies to adapt to changes in the organization and regulatory environment. Enhancing privacy. Enhancing privacy involves implementing various techniques to protect sensitive data and reduce the risk of unauthorized access or disclosure. We do this by using methods such as tokenization, data minimization, data masking, anonymization, and pseudo anonymization. Tokenization. Tokenization is a process of replacing sensitive data with unique identifier symbols or tokens that retain the essential information without exposing the original data. The original data is stored securely in a separate database, and only the token is used in the operational environment. These tokens can be mapped back to the original data only by an authorized system or personnel. Data minimization. Data minimization involves collecting and retaining only the data that is necessary for a specific purpose. In data minimization, we retain data only for as long as it is necessary for the intended purpose. Data masking. Data masking involves obscuring specific data within a database to protect it while keeping its utility for testing or analysis. Data masking is often used to protect personally identifiable information and is done by substitution, shuffling, or encryption. Anonymization. Anonymization involves removing or modifying personal information in the dataset so that individuals cannot be identified. Anonymization is achieved by using data aggregation, data suppression, or addition of noise. After anonymization, the data can never be reverse engineered to get the original data. Pseudo anonymization. Pseudo anonymization is the process of replacing private identifiers with fake identifiers or pseudonyms, which can be reversed under certain conditions. The original data can be recovered using a key or a mapping table, accessible only to authorized personnel. Data roles and responsibilities. In an organization, data roles and responsibilities are critical for managing data governance, ensuring compliance, and protecting sensitive information. Data responsibilities. High level data relationships define how data is managed, accessed, and protected within an organization. A data owner is a person or the team responsible for the data's lifecycle and quality. Data roles. The data controller is an entity that determines the purpose and the means of processing personal data. They're also responsible for implementing appropriate data protection measures. A data processor is an entity that processes data on behalf of the data controller and act on the data only according to the instructions from the data controller. A payload controller is the entity responsible for determining the purposes and the means of processing payroll data. And the payroll processor is the entity responsible for processing payroll data on behalf of the payroll controller. A data custodian or a data steward is an individual or team responsible for managing and protecting data on a day to day basis. They're responsible for ensuring the proper handling and access of data. The data protection officer or the DPO is an individual responsible for overseeing an organization's data protection strategy and ensuring compliance with data protection laws.